rockers? It's Pete Thorn coming to you from my studio. I decided that it might be fun to make a video every now and then, maybe a little series of videos called My Favorite Guitars. If you watch me over the years, you guys have seen me use a bunch of different instruments live, on my YouTube demos, on my records. My main instrument these days, my main squeeze, is my signature Suhr guitar, of course. These instruments serve me so well, especially live. I can get a ton of different sounds out of them. And if I gotta bring only one guitar to a gig that's really versatile, I can take one of these and do everything that I need to do. But of course, in the studio and sometimes even live, it's fun to have something else. And over the years, I've collected a few vintage guitars. I don't have very many, but I've got a few that I would consider to be kind of player-grade instruments. They've all had little mods and stuff done to them, so they're not super pristine, minty, original examples, but great player guitars that feel great, have great tone, and look super cool too. So for the first video in this series, I thought I'd show you one of the few vintage guitars that I own. And this is the guitar that probably seems to have its own biggest fan base of any of the guitars that show up in my videos. When I play this guitar in videos, people are like, "Oh, the 335's back, awesome." In the comments, you always see that, and people are stoked on it. I love this guitar. It's my 1963 ES335. So the story of how I got this guitar. Okay, there's a shop in Hollywood, used to be there, called Vintage Gear. It was on Sunset Boulevard, on the corner of Gardner and Sunset, and this is going back to the late 90s, early 2000s. I don't know how long that store was around. I actually even worked in there briefly for a little while when I was in between tours at one point. The main thing that they sold was kind of offbeat, sort of wacky vintage guitars like Airlines and Supros and stuff like that. They also had lots of ukuleles. This store was way ahead of its time. I mean, the whole ukulele craze happened 10 years or more later, I guess 15 years later. So I feel like in some ways the store was ahead of its time. This was even pre-White Stripes, like before Jack White, was kind of making those types of sort of off-brand vintage guitars popular. But this store would have, everything from Silvertone amps and guitars to Airlines and Nationals and all that kind of stuff, and tons of effects pedals too, as well as vintage keyboards. I remember when I worked there, I actually sold art from Everclear, like a vintage Moog Liberator, which is a keytar. So the store was a partnership between a guy named John Nelson, who was incidentally a terrific guitar player. He used to play with Eddie Money way back in the day. And also Lloyd from Voltage. If anybody knows LA vintage guitar scene and stuff, they'll remember Voltage guitars.
Here's Lloyd recently with the guitar that he originally sold to Kurt Cobain and was used to record Nirvana Unplugged.
So both those guys are super cool, and I got fond memories of both of them. Voltage guitar was really where you would go for the high-end vintage stuff. I mean, if you wanted a, late 50s Les Paul or Strat or something like that, that was the store you were going to go look for it in. And Vintage Gear was more the kind of cheaper stuff that they started as to kind of have a secondary space. But they would get in vintage Fender, Gibson, Gretsch, and stuff like that sometimes, and they would put the more player grade instruments in Vintage Gear. So one day I'm in there, and there's a group of guitar players in there. There's a terrific guitar player I remember in particular named David Kalish. And there's probably 4 or 5 of us. We were all standing around, sitting around in kind of a group, just plugged into an amp and passing around guitars that were in the shop. So I remember there was a nice late 60s or maybe mid 60s, probably like a 65 actually Strat as I remember it. And David was playing the Strat and just playing a bunch of licks, and it sounded really cool. And then somebody handed him this guitar, which had just come in, and he plugged it in and he hit one note and bent it. And I remember what he said in that moment. He said, "Well, and then we all forgot about the Strat." I was like, damn, that guitar sounds fantastic. It just had this bite to it and so much tone. And so had it been all original, which it is not, the guitar would be really, really expensive even back then. But this guitar has had the tailpiece replaced. It originally would have had the, vibrato tailpiece on it. I believe the bridge is non-original as well. There'd been a bit of wacky rewiring done to it so that these were functioning, these two controls. Normally this would be volume, volume, this was volume, volume, and this was tone, tone. So somebody had done that. And underneath the bridge pickup, for whatever reason, probably when somebody went to do the rewiring, and they didn't know what they were doing because these guitars are notoriously difficult to work on, they went in here with a chisel. And so underneath the bridge pickup, there's been some nasty kind of, hack work done with wood taken out. So there's that. On top of all of that, the guitar had a headstock repair when I got it. So the headstock had been broken and fixed. It's also got Grovers on it, which tons of people did in the 70s to their Gibsons. So the tuners have been switched, the bridge has been switched, the wiring was a little wacky, there was the chisel job, and there was a headstock break. But the guitar looks super cool. I mean, it's full on Eric Clapton, you know, or Eric Johnson. I mean, lots of great players had a guitar similar to this era. So all that stuff made it super affordable. I'm not going to tell you what I bought it for, but it was less than probably what a new one would cost, which it almost seemed like a steal at the time. Like, I don't know why John gave it to me so cheap. All I really cared about is that it was a tone monster. You plugged it in and it just rips. So the pickups are original to this guitar. It's got a patent number pickup in the bridge, what would be an early patent number, and a PAF in the neck, which is kind of weird because in 1963, all the vintage guys I've talked to have said, oh, I thought they, you know, used them all up by then. So who knows, maybe this pickup came from another guitar or something, but it's a real PAF in the neck and an early patent number in the bridge. Now, as with pickups from this era, they're pretty low wind, 7 point something K. They are not hot, but because of that, they've just got a ton of clarity. So this guitar, especially on the bridge pickup, is where I totally dig it. It's just a rock and roll monster. I mean, plugged into something like what you heard it through, which is my vintage 50 watt Marshall. It's a 72 Marshall and an old 70s Marshall cabinet. It just sounds like rock and roll. And anybody that tells you that wood isn't a part of a guitar sound, I mean, listen to this thing. So much of the wood comes through the sound of this guitar. There's an acoustic quality to it that's so apparent, and it sounds like nothing else. I mean, it sounds like this guitar. I can't pick up another guitar that I have here, or any guitar that I have anywhere, and make it sound like this guitar. I know it instantly when I hear it. Something about semi-hollow guitars, there's just an air to the sound, and they just have all this tone that's super cool. It's kind of like single coils, and it's part of what I don't really dig many times about super hot humbuckers. With single coils or low wind humbuckers, so much of your personality and your tone, your finger tone, and the wood tone of the guitar comes through the pickup. Couple other things about this guitar. The neck is really quite thin and rather wide, as a lot of them were in this era. It's super playable. I'd love to get an SG from this era as well, like 63, 64, that has the wide, thin neck. It's some of the fastest, most comfortable necks that I've ever played. So I can really rip on this guitar. And the funny thing is, even though the neck is really thin and it's mahogany, it never changes. I mean, the amount of times I've done a truss rod adjustment on this guitar in the past, I don't know, 5 years, I can barely remember if I've done one. I don't remember if I've done one, which means I probably haven't. It just always seems to be the same, which is to say that it's almost dead straight and just plays perfect. The frets are kind of flat, but for whatever reason, I still find them really comfortable and playable. So since I got this guitar, it had another headstock break. I actually took it to a gig one night in Hollywood as a second backup guitar. It was in its case and outside on the sidewalk after the gig, and somebody came by and bumped the case, and the guitar went over kind of hard, but it was in the case and everything. It went over kind of hard on the sidewalk. It just, you know, it was standing on its end and the case just got knocked down. Well, I opened up the case and the headstock was completely shattered. So that was tough. So I took it to True Tone Music in Santa Monica, and they were like, oh, I don't know, man, this is pretty gnarly. And I was like, come on, you gotta fix it. I know you can do it. Otherwise I was gonna have to re-neck the guitar, which I was totally just mortified about. So the guy went for it, and he actually did a really unique repair. He's actually inlaid maple dowels on the back of the headstock. So he went through, put it back together as best he could, and then he went and kind of maybe routed out a little bit and put in these strips of maple to reconstruct it. Now, truth be told, when I got it back, it was okay, But the guitar always seemed to have some problems with tuning. I could never quite get it to play in tune that well. And I took it to another tech after that, a guy named Norik Renson in LA, who's a terrific guitar tech. And he looked at it and he decided to build out the front of the nut just a little bit. So there's actually a little strip of what looks like graphite or something to me on the front of the nut that he put. So the point where the strings make contact over the nut is just a little bit forward from where it would have been when I got it back from the repair. And now it intonates and tunes, as you can hear, just beautifully. I've used it on a ton of demos over the years and recorded a bunch of songs with it. It's the guitar on 10th Street on the solo from Guitar Nerd. I used it with a Zen Drive pedal into my old 60s Bassman amp into a 112 cabinet to get that sound. And it's also the guitar that I played on the track The Groomed Noodler. I love this thing, and it's been a great partner over the years. Like I say, I've had it, I think, at least 18 years, going on maybe 20 years almost. And yeah, sometimes you find a player guitar out there that's got issues, but they're just affordable because of that, and tone machines, and play great. And when you get a guitar like that, you don't have to be so afraid to, you know, nick it or scratch it or take it out on the road, take it to gigs and use it. I mean, even the time that the headstock broke, that was upsetting, but it's like, hey, it had already been broke, so it didn't affect the value of the guitar at all. So I'm not afraid to take it out and play it on tour and use it on gigs and stuff like that. And, you know, as it should be, you should use these things to make music. That's my ES335 from 1963. Thanks for watching. I'll make some more of these videos and show you some more of my favorite guitars real soon.